On July 23, 1996, a group of 4 German tourists went missing in Death Valley National Park.
After several days of a full-force search and rescue operation, no trace of the family was found. Welcome to Buckle Up, the Mystery Podcast. We are your hosts, Aaron and Derek.
Thank you so much for listening. This is episode number 2. Got a great response on the first one, and we're having a blast doing this. So we hate it when people talk too much and vamp at the beginning of a podcast. So we
here we are.
That was what? I'm looking at the counter. That was like 6 seconds of vamping. We're going to jump right into this because the focus of this episode 2 is the puzzling and ultimately tragic, Aaron, tale of what's become known as the story of the Death Valley Germans. The group consisted of 34-year-old Egbert Rinkus, his 11-year-old son, George Weber, Egbert's 27-year-old girlfriend, Cornelia Meyer, and her 4-year-old son, Max Meyer.
They were on a trip to the western United States. Their flight from Germany finished up in LA, where they picked up their rental car and started enjoying the California coast. Then they headed to Las Vegas and checked into the Treasure Island Hotel and Casino on the famous Vegas Strip.
After that, it was back west to the desert known as Death Valley. And for those unfamiliar with Death Valley, it's an area about 3,000 square miles known as the hottest place on Earth, and it has earned that nickname. The highest temperature ever recorded anywhere on planet Earth is 134 degrees Fahrenheit, and it happened in Death Valley in July when the average daily temp was 116 degrees. It was in this place during this month that the group of German tourists went missing for good. What happened to them will remain a mystery for the next 13 years. And Aaron, I got to say, first question I think most people have is, why on earth does anyone go through Death Valley in July, especially with a couple of young kids?
Right. So speculation is they were heading to Yosemite National Park and thought they could get over the pass because of maps. And there's a difference in reading them in Germany and the United States.
What's the difference?
So in Germany, you don't put a road on a map that is inaccessible or that you might need 4-wheel drive to go on. They
would be well marked if it's an impassable or area, or if you need some sort of special vehicle.
Right.
That would be marked on a map in Germany. In the U.S., we get a little cavalier with stuff. We just draw a little line and go.
Exactly. And so there's a history of them purchasing German maps at one of the visitor centers. So they traced back and they purchased 2 copies. Thought one was maybe for navigation, one was for a souvenir. And so they could have just been a problem with reading one of the maps.
Okay, still, there are roads that go to Yosemite that circumvent going straight through the hottest place on Earth. Why go through Death Valley when you're going more west, when you have to go northwest to get to Yosemite?
So let's talk about maybe heat tourism. Isn't that a big deal in Europe?
Actually, you know what it is. In fact, in 2013, National Public Radio, NPR, did a story about what's called, as you said, heat tourism.
Right.
And in the article, Park Ranger Charlie Callaghan said tourists come from all over the world, heavy influence on Europe, to experience temperatures they can't get at home. NPR says July has actually become Death Valley's, as crazy as it is, the busiest month. Remember, 116-degree average daily high temperature.
But they visit because they can't find those temperatures in Germany or most places in Europe, I would venture to say.
I don't know why. I used to live in Phoenix. I don't know why you would want to experience those temperatures on a daily basis, but hey, that's not me. I'm sure the stays are very short. And again, we can't speculate on what people like and don't like when it comes to tourism.
Right. So in the heat of July, it was actually July 22nd that they checked out of Treasure Island. Later that day, they bought the booklet that we discussed from the visitor center and spent their first night camping out in a canyon. Now, Furnace Creek is a good spot in Death Valley to learn about the park with a fully staffed information desk. They continue to travel to visitor sites. Cornelia, the girlfriend, would sign their names on logs at various stops.
Now, they were supposed to board a flight back to Germany on July 27th, so keep that in mind. There is a time crunch here. Those tickets, they were never used. Pregnant pause there for dramatic effect. In the 1996 Plymouth Voyager minivan they'd rented in LA, it was never returned. It was as if they simply just up and vanished. So fast forward to October 21st, same year, 1996. A helicopter pilot doing a routine search for illegal drug activity noticed something odd. A vehicle in a remote area called Anvil Canyon. It was unusual because it's a protected wilderness area that vehicles aren't even allowed on. Plus, the terrain's so rough, even off-road vehicles can have trouble with it. A minivan could never make it through. And when the van was found, it looked like it'd been out in the elements for quite some time.
Right. Super dusty. The van's axles were stuck in the sand. All 4 tires were flat and the wheels were damaged. Like the car had almost been driven on flats for a substantial amount of time. Now, when they checked the plates, the car had been reported as stolen from the rental car company in LA. The last renters turned out to be this German family, so local law enforcement checked with LAX to see if the family had ever returned to Germany and discovered the plane tickets were unused. The revelation triggered this massive operation. Upwards of 200 search and rescue workers were called into the area at various times. They searched the area near the van, but at first, the only trace of the family was a single beer bottle left more than a mile away from the van. The same kind of beer was found in the minivan, so that's how they connected the two.
You can make a pretty safe assumption that beer is going to be connected
I
to
don't
that
think
van.
the Coyotes are going to be drinking Bud Ice.
Unless it's made by Acme, yes, and there's a Roadrunner involved.
my.
Also found in the minivan was an American flag with the label Butte Valley Stone Cabin. That's very likely, as investigators think, called the Geologist Cabin, which is a famous spot out there in Death Valley. And the confirmation of them being there, since they had that flag with them, is interesting because it shows the direction they were generally heading. From Furnace Creek, where they went to that visitor center you mentioned, they stopped at the visitor center Anvil Canyon, nearly 50 miles due south.
So not a short trip.
No, the Geologist Cabin is another nearly 20 miles to the west. Along the way, they left little notes in other visitors' logs they had signed. Cornelia did. One of them dated July 23rd, just one day after they left Las Vegas, said, "We're going over the pass." As commonly thought, that meant Mengel Pass, which is about 2 miles south of the cabin. But if they're trying to get to Yosemite National Park, Aaron, they were headed in the exact opposite direction.
Right. Yosemite is northwest of Las Vegas. So plenty of people drive from Vegas to Yosemite and go through Furnace Creek to see the sights, but there is zero reason to ever go any farther south than that. And this family was 50 to 60 miles farther down than they should have been. Now, Mingle Pass is only one way to cross that mountain range in the area for several miles, but again, the terrain makes it all but impossible for a vehicle that isn't equipped with four-wheel drive. So, if they were trying to get over Mingle Pass, it stands to reason that they realized their car wouldn't make it and they changed course, heading towards Anvil Canyon instead. Now remember, Anvil Canyon roads are no more suited to the minivan than the pass would be, and that's where they got stuck. Search and rescue workers were putting all this together as they went, but never found any other physical evidence that the Germans were anywhere near Death Valley. On October 26th, after nearly a week of looking, authorities called off the search.
All right, I think it's time for a little bit of a recap here because there's just a whole lot of information at you. All right, they flew to LA on July 8th, picked up the rental car, played tourist all over the coast, made it to Vegas at some point, and then checked out of their hotel, the Treasure Island, on July 22nd, allegedly headed towards Yosemite, but they somehow ended up going south instead of north. The van's found in October. A search lasts about 5 days, and then it's called off. First question I have is, should they have looked longer? I mean, Death Valley is a massive place with tons of nooks and crannies to check in.
Right. And so there were over 2 to 250 people on the ground. There were horses on the ground, several helicopters in the air. Nothing was to be found to indicate their presence except for the van and the lone beer bottle. So they searched all these different directions. They couldn't find any additional elements, and they figured with the heat exposure that there was no chance that the family was found alive.
Interesting, though, they never found a body either. So at that point, it doesn't become a search and rescue. It becomes a recovery operation, but they didn't do that either.
Well, there was nothing to recover, right? They searched all where they thought that the family should have been, given the presence of the beer bottle about a mile and a half away from the van, which matched the other beer bottles in the van, but they found no trace of his girlfriend or each of their children.
All right, so why travel to such a remote area? I mean, this type of situation, I'm sure, and this is what we love on this kind of a podcast, it spawns lots of conspiracy theories. What are some of the favorite conspiracy theories that we have? Usually like 3 main ones.
Well, let's I'm sure there's more, right? Aliens are always going to be a thing in Vegas. And
Well, aliens, period, and any disappearance, we're always going to have abductions. So let's go ahead and put that one on the back burner
we're gonna
until we
skip
do
that
an
one.
alien podcast.
We'll save that for the Will Smith movie. But so there was a mention that a coworker said Egbert was interested in Costa Rica to avoid a custody battle for his son. So he was divorced. Cornelia was his
girlfriend. So they're going
girlfriend.
with the stage their disappearance to go start a new life
For
in another
custody,
country.
yes.
Thing. Right.
So that's one. Okay. So 2, they countered that with, why go to Death Valley and stage the disappearance and not just stay in LA or Vegas? Why do you have to go into 116-degree temperature to pretend you're going to Costa Rica?
My assumption there would be, well, because it's a heck of a lot vaster area to search, not nearly as compacted, but also you're talking about a deadly, dangerous area. Again, so is Las Vegas, but for very different reasons. But
Wow.
when you're talking about that, especially when you have children involved,
Right.
I don't get too big into that one. Give me another one.
Okay. Another theory is that they were trying to gain access into the nearby Naval Air Weapons Station, China Lake, in hopes of finding government secrets.
Okay, so this is like some old Cold War kind of thing, right? German spy, maybe they're spying for the Russians. There was still some sort of Iron Curtain thing going on. By the way, I looked into Naval Air Weapons Station, China Lake.
Of course you did.
It's a fascinating place, all right? Allow me to expound, all right? About the size of Rhode Island, 1.1 million square miles. Likes to keep things secret because it handles research, development, acquisition, testing, and evaluation of cutting-edge weapon systems for planes and missiles. The going line basically is anything the Navy's used in warfare that flies through the air and has so since the 1940s has been either tested or developed at China Lake. Also, if you're driving from Death Valley to China Lake, one of the most direct routes is through Mangle Pass.
We're going through the pass.
About a 75-mile drive to the heart of the base. So you can see why the spy theory is a popular one. And in another somewhat psychotic twist to this, between the pass and the base, you have to drive through Barker Ranch. That sound familiar?
Charles Manson.
Yeah, that's where Charles Manson orchestrated the deaths of at least 9 people, and that's the place where he was eventually arrested. So adds another layer of intrigue to the conspiracy people out there. You throw the Manson clan in that, and all of a sudden you have a whole lot of people. Ooh, it was a Manson, German, Cold War, Russian, communist spying attempt that went horribly wrong.
That sounds like a really good movie for Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yeah, the Riff Tracks guy should definitely jump on that one.
Okay,
If they we should make that movie just so Mike should make fun of it.
So maybe Charles Manson wasn't wandering out about there, but there is a theory that they did run into some other kind of foul play out in the desert.
How do you feel about that one?
I don't know how to feel about that one. Where Anvil Canyon was essentially an old mining track, and so search and rescue did have to look in old mining shafts and things of that nature, but it's very remote, right? And it's very hard to get to. So I'm not buying the fact that against all odds they ran into somebody murderous, if that makes sense.
So if that was the case, it would have had to have been a crime of circumstance, not a crime. Like somebody didn't plan a hit on these people in Death Valley.
Right.
It would have been somebody they ran into and something went horribly wrong.
Somebody really wanted the butt ice.
Right, precisely. And I will never understand why butt ice still even
So you can
exists.
see why you dismissed that theory.
Yes. So it's interesting. So now we're going back to simply what happened because it doesn't make any sense. Now, a case like this, I mean, it doesn't go away, right? Even after the search stops. The intrigue and challenge trying to figure out just what happened to the 4 people was bound to prompt more folks to try and solve the riddle. So after that, several private searches were conducted by different groups. They checked a nearby abandoned mining area that you mentioned, Aaron. Everything they could think of. Nothing of the group turned up until 2009 when a guy named Tom Mahood began pursuit.
So Tom is an enthusiast, but he's also a professional. In February of 2009, Tom joined the Riverside Mountain Rescue Unit. In his field classes, he met members who were part of the original search and rescue unit who had looked for the missing Germans, and they filled him in on the story. He was completely hooked. So even 13 years later, he found a lead in Debbie Breitenstein, who had kept much of the original documentation from the case. She also gave him 2 more leads to private investigators who had written reports regarding the missing group. From here, Tom tried to organize all the information, and you can read his story in its entirety at otherhand.org, but Tom likes to write a lot.
A lot.
Also, but it's good. It's good. It's just a lot. It's going to take you some hours.
It did. That's why we kind of condensed a lot of this. Also, make sure you check out his FAQ. It's fascinating. But obviously, Tom realized the previous search and rescue teams had been extremely thorough in checking all the places the Germans, as he wrote, quote, should have been, end quote. Tom took a day trip out to Anvil Canyon, and he found a bush where he thought that the beer bottle was probably left. Other people had talked about it. It kind of became commonly known as the beer bottle bush, which in Death Valley I can also assume be called the burning bush because it's hot. He hiked around the area about 12 miles, didn't see anything new. A few days later, back home looking at a map of the area, he realized the searchers may have missed something 13 years prior. After finding the beer bottle at the bush, they focused on the direction they thought the Germans were headed. But even with the nearly 200 people and all the resources they committed to the search, they didn't spend much, if any, time looking to the south.
That makes sense, and we'll get back to the south in a minute. Now, when the research teams looked at the bush in relation to the van, which was to the east, along with the fact that nothing was really available to the south, they didn't think anyone would go that direction. So Tom put together a theory. One of the reasons the Germans could have been in Death Valley camping is that they were running out of money. Egbert had received a $1,500 money wire earlier in their trip and then asked his ex-wife for another $1,500 when he was in Vegas. And could you imagine the audacity? So she refused, which is super understandable given the fact that they were in a custody battle at the time. Now, Tom speculated that they were off the beaten path in Death Valley to avoid having to pay for campsites or hotels, or Airbnb wasn't available back then, but, camping in a van is probably not your first option. So he notes that going up into the canyon instead of on the valley floor would be several degrees cooler, and that could have been a factor in their thinking as well.
Now, remember we talked about the difference in maps between Germany and America. Well, it's possible they went the direction they did because the maps that they had, which were recovered in the van, showed lines that could get them to Yosemite and go through Barker Ranch, the Manson compound. Now, Mahood suggested this could be an entertaining route, quote, if they knew the history of these locales, end quote. But, and allow me to interject an opinion here, I don't think entertainment had anything to do with it. If you're low on funds and having to camp with a couple of young kids in Death Valley in July, and you really don't care about making a joyride, that adds mileage to the trip, meaning more money for gas, food, water, and I find it highly unlikely they were trying to take the scenic route to Yosemite at that point.
Plus, their rental van had to be back in LA in 3 days. If they wanted to get to Yosemite, they needed to do it as quickly as possible. Tom theorizes they tried Mingle Pass, but realized they couldn't make it with that car, so they turned back, but realized they'd already burned a couple hours trying to get over the pass. Now they had a decision to make. Cut bait on going to Yosemite and just head back to LA a couple of days early, or try to find another route where they wanted to go. Tom thinks they did the latter, and again, incorrectly interpreting the map, took a turn into Anvil Canyon, a turn for the absolute worst.
Yeah, the early part of the road's passable for the minivan, so they're thinking, all right, you're all good. But it soon becomes the playground of the four-wheel drive, impassable for their rental van to navigate. Mahood believes they reached a sandy area and sped up to avoid getting stuck, but that simply kicked up more rocks and eventually took out some of the tires. And over time, after trying desperately to get through to another drivable road where they could change at least one of the flat tires and maybe keep going, they got stuck in the sand for good.
So now they're in a survival situation, even though they don't realize it. And they don't realize their next move could be critical to their survival or demise. Searchers at the site say the evidence suggests someone hiked 2 miles to the east in Anvil Canyon, drank a beer to hydrate, even though alcohol does the complete opposite, leaving the bottle underneath the bit of shrubbery that they use for shade. That spot is now known as the beer bottle bush, like Derek mentioned, and it was probably Egbert who did the hike. This is one of the keys to Tom's theory. From that spot, it's only about 8.5 miles to the very edge of the Naval Air Weapons Station, China Lake. Now, remember, we mentioned it's about 75 miles to the base itself, but that establishment technically spans more than 1 million square miles, making it the Navy's single largest landholding. Thing is, 95% of it is undeveloped. In fact, it's home to some of America's endangered species that are kept safe because they're in areas where people are not allowed. There are a few areas with fences warning people to keep out, but most of the defense of China Lake is in its remote location. The real defense measures don't come until you get closer to the testing areas.
Still, Mahood came up with the idea that these Germans assumed an American military base would be similar to the ones in Europe, regular patrols around the outer limits. So Tom thought that Egbert would have looked at the maps that they had, seen the border of the base to be maybe 8-9 miles away, and then gambled that they could hike that distance, find a sentry, explain their situation, and get the help they needed to return home. So according to Tom, that's why the original search parties didn't find the Germans. The SNR crews would have known about the base and written it off, whereas the Germans saw it to the south as their road to survival.
Now that Tom had a direction, there was an even more difficult task at hand, finding the route the Germans took. The most obvious paths are 3 drainage areas that run north to south. In November of 2009, Tom and a friend named Les Walker decided to start checking those routes. They took an overnight trip to Anvil Canyon, split up, and started south towards an area known as Squaw Spring. Les called Tom when he made a startling discovery: a wine bottle, a day planner written in German, and what looked to be human bones.
Okay, I just got goosebumps.
I know. Tom hiked over to the spot to expand the search area, and by the time they had to head back, they had uncovered a wallet. The ID inside belonged to, can you guess? Cornelia Meyer. But they could not tell if the bones were adult or adolescent or male or female or even how many different bodies they might have come across. So They went back and told the park ranger and law enforcement what they had found. The next day, the local sheriff's office and FBI got together to fly Tom back to the site.
Okay, I need to just ask, can you imagine what the feeling is when you make a discovery like that? Like, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps here just thinking
and
about it.
And you see bones, human remains.
It's got to be just the gamut of emotions of we found them and we found them.
And like sadness, tragedy, what they went through.
It's got to be exhilaration followed by exactly what you said. Just sadness of, wow, these people didn't make it. Man, at this point, another search was organized to look for the rest of the German party, including dogs, rescue teams from the desert, several different S&R organizations. In early December, we found more remains, but a storm rolled in. And they can be nasty in Death Valley, so they couldn't extract them until the 29th of December.
It's almost a month out there.
Correct. The Inyo County Sheriff's Office, they handled forensic testing, trying to determine if the missing Germans had finally been found. Now, this is where everyone's hoping for the big reveal. The final picture comes into focus, right? Unfortunately, this mystery still has a few secrets. Let's go to March 8th, 2010. A news outlet reported the sheriff's office could not make a positive identification of what was found in Death Valley. The harsh conditions and extreme weather had deteriorated the bones to the extent that no viable DNA was available. All they could determine for sure was they'd found bones of an adult female and an adult male, meaning as far as science could tell, and this is heartbreaking, the children's remains were still in the desert.
After that, there have only been sporadic updates on the case, mostly from Tom and various local media reports. Tom says later, in 2010, he got a couple of calls from a sheriff's deputy working the case and was told further DNA testing gave them a match to Egbert, and further searching of surrounding areas turned up some children's shoes and small bones. They were sent off for DNA testing, and the female adult remains went through another round of tests by another lab. But after that, the trail of information more or less stops. The sheriff's office returned the effects that had been found to the families of the missing individuals back in Germany, but the results of any more testing on the remains was never reported on. Not officially. However, Derek and I did some sleuthing and searched the National Missing and Unidentified Person System and made an interesting discovery. Both Cornelia and Egbert's son George are still listed as missing by this registry, but Egbert and Cornelia's son Max are not. So it stands to reason that the small bones found were tested and officially identified as Max, something that I don't know that has been reported on before now.
You're the one that did all of that. Don't
That's
give me a we. You're the genius in this operation.
You made the whiskey
okay?
on the rocks that gave me the idea, and then I had to go for it.
Then I will take a little bit of credit for this.
And I'm
yes.
sure, I'm sure other individuals might have searched and found something similar. This has not been a piece of information we've come across on our research. So it is fascinating that they think that one of the children could have possibly been found and not actually Cornelia. However, remember the bones that are suspected to be hers were very dried out from the sun, so it may never be able to be proven that she, was found.
And I think the speculation there is you have to go with if there's an ID, if there's a wallet, then you're going to have to think, okay, you can go with, that's probably the case. So there's really only one person in this entire thing that the other child who really hasn't been found yet. And I don't want to speculate on what may have happened to them out there because it is terrifying and it is horrifying and it's an awful situation, especially when children are involved. And I'm wondering if you're in a situation like that and you're these adults, these folks, you're thinking, okay, we have to survive, but we have to survive for the kids. So you start I can see where they start going to the south. They start thinking, hey, maybe this is what I'm thinking might be the best path to go on.
Their best chance.
And you start almost grasping at straws because you're thinking, I have to save the kids. I have to save the kids.
But how incredible is it that Tom came 13 years later, gave these families a sense of closure to what happened to the members of their own family, and did all this work and research and actually ended up finding evidence that these people had lost their lives.
Also, how upset must Tom have been when it was Les who went the other direction and he's made the first discovery?
Find. I know. He was probably just happy that those things were discovered, but it probably a little bit, I know I would. I'd be like, I wanted to find the wine bottle.
It's amazing how somebody can find some sort of singular focus and drive to. It's almost, I don't want to say obsession because it's probably not the right word, but it's more like a mission.
Ambitious, yeah.
Yeah, you get a mission where you're like, I need to figure this out, and you take it on as your your personal pet project, and then to have it actually come to fruition, and then, as you said, to give families on another continent, several countries away, the kind of closure
And decades later,
that they probably would have never had otherwise. That is an admirable feat.
it is. So, Derek, what do we have coming up next podcast?
We got a bunch of different ideas.
Yeah, we do. And we'd like to hear yours too. So drop us a line. Our handles are So Buckle Up across all social media platforms.
Go to the website, which is
SoBuckleUp.com.
Drop us a line. Let us know what you think. If you have any mysteries that you maybe don't know about, maybe something you came across online.
Wouldn't a mystery be inherently something you don't know about?
Yeah, it's really not a good call by me.
I'm
If there's something you want more information about, there you go.
I'm cutting you off.
This is why I shouldn't ad-lib, even though I ad-lib for a living.
Okay, that's it for us. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it.
Get on all the different podcasting platforms. Give us that 5-star rating. Give us a review. Let us know how wonderful we are.
You sound like a YouTuber now. Hit that subscribe button.
Yeah, we haven't got to the YouTube thing yet. I think because you're young enough to do the YouTube thing. I'm too old to do the YouTube thing.
Wow, that is not accurate. Okay, thanks for listening, everybody.
See y'all later.